Right now, as you're watching this, there's a good chance you're carrying something heavy, not in your hands, not on your shoulders, but somewhere deeper. It's that gnawing feeling in your chest, that voice whispering worst-case scenarios, that invisible weight pressing down on you before you even start your day. We call it anxiety. But what if I told you that almost everything you're anxious about is a ghost, a phantom you've created that has no substance in reality? What if the moment you truly see reality for what it is, not what your mind tells you it is, anxiety doesn't just decrease, it crumbles completely? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will fundamentally shift how you experience every anxious moment for the rest of your life. Let me start with something that might sound strange. Anxiety isn't actually caused by reality. Read that again. Anxiety isn't caused by what's actually happening around you right now. It's caused by your interpretation of reality, your projection into the future, your mental simulation of disasters that haven't happened, and statistically probably never will. Think about the last time you felt genuinely anxious. Maybe it was before a presentation, before a difficult conversation, or just lying in bed at 3 in the morning. Now ask yourself this honest question. In that moment of anxiety, was the thing you feared actually happening? Or were you suffering from a movie playing in your head, a storyline you'd written where everything goes wrong? Here's the uncomfortable truth that most people never grasp. We spend the majority of our lives not living in reality, but living in a mental simulation of reality. We're constantly narrating, predicting, catastrophizing, and creating elaborate storylines about what might happen, what people might think, what could go wrong. Your brain, this incredible 3-pound universe inside your skull, has evolved to be a prediction machine. It's constantly trying to anticipate threats, prepare for danger, keep you safe. This was phenomenally useful when we were dodging predators on the savannah, but in the modern world, this same mechanism has turned against us. Your brain treats an upcoming job interview with the same threat detection system it would use for a charging lion. It treats social rejection with the same alarm bells it would ring for physical danger. And here's the kicker. It does this so seamlessly, so automatically, that you don't even realize you're doing it. Let me paint you a picture of what I mean. Imagine you send a text to someone you care about. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's someone you're dating. Maybe it's a family member. You send the message and you wait. An hour passes, 2 hours, 3 hours, no response. What happens in your mind? If you're like most people, your brain immediately starts spinning stories. They're mad at me. I said something wrong. They're avoiding me. They don't care about me anymore. This relationship is falling apart. Within minutes, you've gone from a simple, unreturned text to a full-blown crisis scenario playing out in your imagination. Your heart rate increases. Your stomach tightens. You feel that familiar wash of anxiety flooding through your body. But here's the question. What's actually happening in reality? Someone hasn't responded to a text yet. That's it. That's the only factual reality. Everything else, every ounce of suffering you're experiencing, is coming from the story you're telling yourself about that reality. Now multiply that by every situation in your life. The presentation you have to give next week, the health symptom you noticed yesterday, the financial pressure you're under, the relationship dynamic that feels off. In almost every case, your anxiety isn't about what's actually happening right now. It's about what you think might happen, what you imagine could happen, what you fear will happen. You're suffering from fiction. You're experiencing genuine physiological stress, real cortisol flooding your system, actual sleep disruption and stomach problems and tension headaches, all because of stories that exist only in your head. So what does it mean to see reality like this, in a way that makes anxiety crumble? It means making a fundamental distinction that most people never make. It means separating what's actually happening from what you think about what's happening. It means recognizing the difference between the territory and the map. Reality is the territory. Your thoughts about reality are the map. And here's something crucial. The map is not the territory. The map is never the territory. Your thoughts about a situation are not the situation itself. Your fears about the future are not the future. Your interpretations of someone's behavior are not their actual intentions. When you start to see this clearly, something remarkable happens. You realize that in this present moment right now, almost nothing is wrong. Check in with yourself right now as you're watching this. What's actually wrong in this exact moment? Not what might go wrong tomorrow, not what went wrong yesterday, not what you're worried could happen, But right here, right now, in this breath, in this moment of existence, what's actually wrong? For most people, the honest answer is nothing. You're breathing. You're alive. You're conscious. You have the capacity to see and hear and think. The present moment, when you actually examine it without the overlay of thought, is almost always okay. It's almost always manageable. The suffering comes when you leave the present moment and travel in your mind to imagined futures or ruminated pasts. This isn't just philosophy or positive thinking. This is an observable, verifiable truth about how anxiety works. Anxiety is always about time. It's always about leaving the now and projecting into the then. The word itself comes from the Latin anxious, meaning troubled or worried, which comes from anger, meaning to choke or cause distress. And what chokes us? The grip of thoughts about what isn't here yet, what might never be here. You cannot be anxious about this moment. You can only be anxious about your thoughts about what this moment means for future moments. Let me give you a practical framework for seeing reality clearly. When you notice anxiety rising, pause and ask yourself 3 questions. First, what is actually happening right now, stripped of all interpretation? Just the bare facts. Second, what story am I telling myself about what's happening? What am I adding to the facts? Third, is this story definitely true, or is it one possible interpretation among many? These 3 questions create a gap, a space between stimulus and response, and in that gap lies freedom. Let's apply this to a common scenario. You wake up and remember you have a difficult meeting at work today. Immediately, anxiety floods in. Now apply the framework. What's actually happening right now? You're in bed. You're remembering that you have a meeting scheduled later. That's it. What story are you telling yourself? The meeting will go badly. Your boss will be critical. You'll say something stupid. Everyone will judge you. You might get fired. You'll disappoint people. You're not prepared enough. You're not good enough. Is this story definitely true? No. It's a prediction. It's one possible outcome among infinite possibilities. The meeting might go well. It might be cancelled. It might be completely neutral. Your boss might be in a good mood. You might say exactly the right thing. But even if it goes badly, you'll survive it. You've survived every difficult moment you've ever experienced. You're still here. What happens when you see it this clearly? The anxiety doesn't necessarily disappear completely, but it loses its grip. It stops being this overwhelming force that controls you and becomes simply a feeling, a sensation in your body, a thought passing through your mind. You stop identifying with it. You stop believing it. You see it for what it is. Your brain's attempt to prepare you for danger, running its ancient programming in a modern context where it's no longer useful. Here's another crucial insight about seeing reality clearly. Most of what you're anxious about never happens. There have been studies on this. People were asked to write down their worries and then follow up months later to see what actually transpired. The results are striking. Over 85% of what people worried about never actually happened. 85%. And of the 15% that did happen, 79% of people reported they handled it better than they thought they would, or that it taught them a lesson worth learning. Think about what this means. You're spending your precious life energy, your peace of mind, your present moment awareness, worrying about things that have about a 3% chance of happening and being as bad as you fear. That's not rational risk assessment. That's torture. That's volunteering for suffering. But it goes even deeper than this. Even when you're anxious about something real, something that genuinely needs to be addressed, the anxiety itself doesn't help you address it. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand. Anxiety doesn't solve problems. Anxiety doesn't prepare you. Anxiety doesn't make you perform better. In fact, anxiety does the exact opposite. It narrows your thinking. It triggers your fight or flight response, flooding your body with stress hormones that literally reduce activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, creativity, and problem solving. When you're anxious, you're actually less capable of dealing with whatever you're anxious about. So what does help? Presence helps. Clear seeing helps. Action helps. When you see reality clearly, without the distortion of anxious thoughts, you can assess what actually needs to be done and do it. You can prepare for the meeting without catastrophizing about it. You can have the difficult conversation without writing disaster scripts beforehand. You can address the problem without drowning in worry about all the ways it might destroy you. This is the paradox. The less anxious you are, the better equipped you are to handle whatever life presents. Now, I want to address something important. I'm not saying that concerns aren't legitimate or that problems aren't real. If you have a genuine threat in your life, if you're in danger, if something needs your attention, that's different from anxiety. That's appropriate concern. That's your system working correctly, alerting you to take action. The key difference is this: appropriate concern is proportionate to the actual threat and motivates effective action. Anxiety is disproportionate to the actual threat and paralyzes effective action. Concern says, "This deadline is approaching, I should work on this project." Anxiety says, "This deadline is approaching, I'm going to fail, everyone will think I'm incompetent, my career is over, I can't handle this, what's wrong with me?" See the difference? Let me share something that might help you see reality even more clearly. Your anxiety often isn't even about the thing you think it's about. Scratch the surface of most anxiety, and you'll find it's not really about the presentation or the conversation or the decision. It's about something deeper. It's about the fear of not being enough, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being seen as inadequate, the fear of losing control, the fear of being alone. These core fears are using whatever situation you're facing as a vehicle to express themselves. This is why you can solve one problem and immediately find something new to be anxious about. The anxiety isn't really about the problem. It's about these deeper fears that haven't been addressed. When you see this clearly, something shifts. You realize you're not actually afraid of public speaking. You're afraid people will judge you and find you lacking. You're not actually afraid of being alone on Friday night. You're afraid of what it means about your worthiness and lovability. You're not actually afraid of making the wrong decision. You're afraid you can't trust yourself and will ruin your life. Once you see these deeper fears clearly, you can address them directly instead of playing whack-a-mole with surface-level anxieties that keep regenerating. And here's what's beautiful about seeing reality clearly. When you look directly at these core fears, when you really examine them in the light of awareness, they start to dissolve too, because they're also based on false premises. You are enough not because you achieve certain things or get certain approval, but because existence itself is enough. Being alive, being conscious, being here is inherently valuable. You don't have to earn your worth. You don't have to prove your lovability. These things are your birthright simply by existing, but the anxious mind can't see this. The anxious mind is always trying to achieve safety and worth through external validation and control. And it's a game you can never win, because the goalpost keeps moving. So how do you actually practice seeing reality clearly in a way that makes anxiety crumble? It starts with catching yourself in the act of leaving reality and entering mental simulation. Throughout your day, as often as you can remember, pause and ask, am I present with what's actually happening, or am I lost in thoughts about what might happen? When you notice you're lost in thought, you don't need to fight the thoughts or push them away. You simply acknowledge them for what they are. Thoughts, mental events, not reality itself. Then you can choose to return your attention to what's actually here, the sensation of breathing, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the sounds around you, the task immediately in front of you. This practice is simple but profound. Every time you catch yourself spinning anxious stories and return to present reality, you're weakening the pattern. You're training your brain that it doesn't have to believe every scary story it generates. You're creating new neural pathways that make it easier to stay grounded in reality instead of lost in mental simulation. Over time, you'll notice something remarkable. The gaps between anxious episodes get longer. The intensity of anxiety when it does arise gets weaker. Your default state starts to shift from anxious anticipation to grounded presence. There's also something powerful about accepting reality exactly as it is instead of arguing with it. So much anxiety comes from resistance to what is. This shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't feel this way. This isn't fair. Life shouldn't be this hard. But reality doesn't care about your shoulds. Reality simply is. When you stop arguing with reality, when you accept what is while still working to change what can be changed, anxiety loses much of its fuel. This doesn't mean becoming passive or resigned. It means seeing clearly what's in your control and what isn't, and directing your energy accordingly. You can't control whether you get anxious feelings. You can control whether you believe them and follow them down the rabbit hole. You can't control what other people think of you. You can control how you show up and express yourself. You can't control outcomes. You can control your effort and intention. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable and focus on what's actually in your hands, anxiety naturally decreases because you're no longer exhausting yourself fighting battles that can't be won. Here's something else that happens when you see reality clearly. You realize that discomfort is not danger. This is huge. Your anxious mind treats discomfort as if it's catastrophic. A difficult conversation feels like a threat to your survival. Uncertainty feels unbearable. Vulnerability feels dangerous. But none of these things are actually dangerous. They're uncomfortable. And there's a massive difference. You can handle discomfort. You've been handling it your entire life. You can't handle actual danger without taking action. But you can absolutely sit with discomfort without it destroying you. When you start to recognize that anxiety is often just discomfort that you're interpreting as danger, you can stop treating it like an emergency. You can feel anxious and still move forward. You can notice the sensation of anxiety in your body, the racing thoughts, the urge to avoid, and you can choose differently. You can say, okay, I feel anxious, and I'm going to do this thing anyway. Not because you're brave or strong, but because you see clearly that the anxiety is just a feeling, not a fact about what will happen. Every time you do this, every time you feel the fear and act anyway, you prove to your brain that it can survive what it was afraid of. You weaken anxiety's hold. There's something I need to say about this too. Seeing reality clearly doesn't mean you'll never feel anxious again. It doesn't mean you become some perfectly calm robot who's unaffected by life. You're human. You have a nervous system that responds to stress. You have a brain that generates worry. What changes is your relationship to anxiety. Instead of being controlled by it, terrified of it, ruled by it, you see it clearly for what it is. A temporary state, a mental weather pattern, something that arises and passes. When you stop adding the second layer of suffering, the suffering about suffering, the anxiety about anxiety, the experience becomes much more manageable. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. You feel anxiety arising before that important event. Instead of panicking about the anxiety, instead of thinking something's wrong with you, instead of trying desperately to make it go away, you simply notice it. You think, there's anxiety. My brain is doing its threat detection thing. That makes sense given what's coming up. And then you go about your preparation anyway. You let the anxiety be there. You don't feed it with catastrophic thinking. You don't fight it with forced positivity. You just let it exist while you do what needs to be done. This is freedom. Not the absence of anxiety, but the ability to function fully even when anxiety is present. Now, all of this requires something crucial. You have to be willing to question your thoughts. Most people never do this. They assume that if they think something, it must be true. If they feel anxious, there must be something to be anxious about. But thoughts are not facts. Feelings are not facts, they're experiences. Yes, they're real as experiences. But they're not necessarily accurate reflections of external reality. Your thought that everyone will judge you harshly is just a thought. It's not a fact about what will actually happen. Your feeling that you can't handle something is just a feeling. It's not a fact about your capabilities. When you start questioning your thoughts instead of automatically believing them, everything changes. You think everyone will think I'm stupid. Then you question, is that definitely true? Can I know for certain what everyone will think? Have I ever been in situations where I thought people would judge me and they actually didn't? Is it possible some people might have positive reactions? Is it possible their reactions are more about them than about me? This kind of inquiry doesn't deny your experience. It simply opens up space around the anxious thought so it's no longer the only truth, the only possibility. Here's what's fascinating. When you really look at anxious thoughts closely, you often find they're not even coherent. They're vague, catastrophic, contradictory. I'll fail and everyone will reject me and I'll be alone forever and I'll never recover. Really? Forever? Never? Everyone? These are the thoughts of a frightened child, not rational assessments of probability. When you see this clearly, when you recognize the irrational nature of most anxious thinking, you stop taking it so seriously. There's also tremendous power in recognizing patterns. Your anxiety probably isn't random. It probably follows predictable patterns. Maybe it spikes before social situations. Maybe it emerges around certain types of people. Maybe it shows up when you're tired or hungry or stressed. Maybe it's worse at certain times of day or in certain contexts. When you start tracking these patterns, you see that anxiety isn't this mysterious force that randomly attacks you. It's a conditioned response that your nervous system has learned, and what has been learned can be unlearned. What has been conditioned can be reconditioned. This is where practice comes in. Seeing reality clearly isn't a one-time insight that fixes everything forever. It's a practice you engage in moment by moment, day by day. Every time you catch yourself spinning anxious stories and return to what's actually happening, you're practicing. Every time you question a catastrophic thought instead of believing it, you're practicing. Every time you feel anxiety and choose to act from your values instead of from your fears, you're practicing. Over time, this practice rewires your brain. It creates new default patterns. It makes presence and clarity more accessible than anxiety and confusion, but you have to be patient with yourself. You've probably been practicing anxiety for years, maybe decades. You've got well-worn neural pathways for catastrophic thinking. Those don't disappear overnight. There will be days when you see reality clearly, and anxiety has no grip on you. There will be days when you get completely lost in anxious thinking and can't find your way out. That's okay, that's part of the process. The path isn't linear. What matters is the general trajectory, the overall direction. Are you slightly more able to catch anxious thinking than you were 6 months ago? Are you slightly more able to stay present with what is? Are you slightly more willing to act despite fear? That's progress. That's enough. One more thing about seeing reality clearly. It reveals that you're not alone in this. Everyone experiences anxiety. Everyone has a mind that generates fearful stories. Everyone struggles with uncertainty and vulnerability. When you see this clearly, you realize that your anxiety doesn't make you broken or defective. It makes you human. There's tremendous relief in this recognition. You can stop adding shame on top of anxiety. You can stop thinking there's something uniquely wrong with you. You can meet your anxiety with compassion instead of judgment, with curiosity instead of criticism. So here's what I want you to take from this. Anxiety feels overwhelming because you're not just dealing with present reality. You're dealing with layers of thought, interpretation, story, and projection that your mind has added to reality. When you learn to see this clearly, when you learn to distinguish between what's actually happening and what you're thinking about what's happening, anxiety loses its power. It doesn't disappear completely, but it crumbles from an overwhelming force into something manageable, something you can work with, something that no longer controls your life. The practice is simple. Return to reality again and again. Return to this moment, this breath, this step. Trust that you can handle what's actually here. Stop suffering from fiction. Stop living in mental simulation. Come back to what is. That's where your life is happening. That's where peace lives. That's where you'll find that anxiety crumbles the moment you see reality like this. O Claude pode cometer erros. Confida sempre as respostas.